So today we are joined by Megan Shulby, who's currently a lead ecom manager at AT&T Corporate in Dallas. Megan, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely, it's wonderful to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course. So you've done a lot of stuff in your background. Like you've been at multiple companies that are widely recognized. Well, let's start with at AT&T. Well, let's start with what you started at and then where you're at now, and then we'll kind of jump into what it is you do currently.
Okay, quite the story there. I was a part of AT&T just coming out of my double master's degree at the University of Arizona, and I was privileged enough to join AT&T's Leadership Development Program. It's one of the oldest development programs in the United States, and when they say leadership development, they essentially try to train you up as a holistic manager, and they expose you to all facets of business, ranging from technology to operations to finance, marketing, across the gambit. So my background's in marketing and in advertising as well as analytics. They put me in operations. So your good old-fashioned telephone lines, I was in charge of an operations team. And the leadership development program's a rotation program. So unlike a lot of jobs where you're in the position, you're there for 5-6 years or what might be a long time, and you become very knowledgeable of a specific area, they try to train you up and expose you to a wide variety of areas. So very broad, and then the depth is just enough to get you up to snuff on where they think you need to be as an accelerated manager. My first rotation was in operations for our landline division, because AT&T is the longest running telecommunications company in the United States. From there, I went into the complete opposite direction, switched over to artificial intelligence product development based out of our Plano office. Did that for a short stint. And then I switched over and I did capital finance for our fiber division. So your business fiber, which is essentially your broadband internet connectivity across the United States. My team was in charge of the capital expenditures for that, from the nuts and bolts all the way up to where it's installed in your building. And after the program, I graduated. I am now the lead e-commerce manager for our business-to-business enterprise platform and development team. So I work on the technology side of the house, facilitating large-scale deals. And as of right now, I'm spearheading a large multi-million-dollar digital transformation effort that we're undergoing. So that's my 18.
Right. So that rotation program that you were a part of had 3 stints. Yeah, you were a part of 3 different groups, and then you ultimately, you graduated into where you're at now.
Yes.
Did you have
the idea behind the program?
Did you have an input on which group you'd be in during your rotations, or was it kind of they kind of had an idea of what you wanted to do and they tried to cater it around that, or was it just entirely driven by business need?
I think it was a collaborative effort all around. Of course, it had to do with what the business needed, where they thought I would make the most impact, and of course, where I'm also interested in expanding my skill set. So in regards to all 3, I had some say in it, but it also was having to do with the fact the business knew where they thought my strengths and skill sets would best help the business.
When you were graduating from your MBA program at Arizona, did you want to do a rotation program type thing, or did you already have an idea of, no, I kind of want it to be this job, and you'd be fine kind of progressing through there? Because, for example, when I was in school, the job I had out of school I got was a rotational program too, and I kind of wanted that just to kind of have the exposure on the different lines of business. So I'm kind of curious how it was for you.
I would say, as I went through my MBA and my dual master's degree in management information systems, I realized with me that leadership development and a rotational program was going to be the next step in the process for me, I suppose. I think rotational programs, development programs are key, because you can go into a master's program and learn these skill sets, and then of course you'll have your internships, but the development programs really do provide a great way for you to not only hone in on your skills that you learn in MBA, or whether it's a master's in information systems degree like I have, it could be public policy, it could be anything. It could be in Master's of Fine Arts, or it could be finance.
Hmm.
It really does allow you to kind of expose yourself to the different facets of a particular business, understand where they kind of stand on different legs, what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses. And it also kind of makes you realize what you truly like, don't like, what you're good at, and you don't like. I mean, because in my mind, school can teach you one thing and you may come out thinking you're good at something or think that you may love something. But once you apply that for anywhere between, I would say, 6 to 12 months in a particular position, you're going to get a different perception.
I agree.
Because school and business are not the same thing in my mind.
Yeah, definitely. And that's something I've talked about, I think, on here before and just with other people outside of here is it's how drastically different it is from school to the work environment. Even if it's in like the same, major, like you studied accounting and you go into accounting and then you realize, actually, I liked it in school. I don't like the actual application of it. So I think that's, again, one of the benefits of those programs.
And I think that you kind of struck on a great word there, application. Because application in the world is definitely going to be different than what you'll learn in your internships. And don't get me wrong, internships are critical. What you learn in school and the frameworks there are critical. But the application of those skill sets is going to be driven by the company culture and the company kind of best practices. So it's a little bit different, but I think that's a great way of putting it.
And you said this was AT&T's leadership development program is one of the oldest ones in the country.
It is.
That's very interesting. Because I mean, I don't know how long these have been around, but at least the one that I joined, I worked at Goodyear, and the one I worked at Goodyear, I think at the time that I joined was almost 20 years. I think almost 20 years or so. So yeah, and you kind of, and the benefit of, I guess, joining it towards those latter stages of it is like they've already probably gone through a lot of the trial and error. So by the time you kind of get there, they've probably already really cemented the program and how they approach it, how they do everything.
Well, I think too, a lot of it is going to be trial and error, regardless if you're 2 years old, like some programs, or you're going to be like 40 years old, like AT&T. They're always pivoting, always changing, particularly when there's new. Apologies if you hear pinging. My sister just got her new dog, so we're very excited over here.
No worries.
So I think it's just you have to apply and realize that development programs are going to be for some people, and I know a good number of people have gone through rotation programs and loved them, and it's going to be for others. You just have to do your research and to what the reviews of the program are. If you can talk to people who are currently in the program, I would highly suggest doing that. Graduates as well, but then also see like who's in charge of the program, where they came from in their background, because it could be 2 years old, but that doesn't discount it as being a terrific program. And I mean, AT&T is 40 years in the making. They've done some remarkable things, and they actually have had some of their leaders have gone on to other companies and built out similar programs. So it's definitely something. Goodyear, 20 years, I'm sure they have much more knowledge about certain things that AT&T does not.
Certainly, sure. The one thing I wanted to ask about is when I was checking kind of your background, I had forgotten you had an internship here, but you also had an internship at T-Mobile, correct?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, so over there, it was with their Internet of Things group?
Yes, it was. It
Okay.
was with their Internet of Things group.
Do you see any, so now given the time you've been at AT&T and then, because I know that the T-Mobile one was just a few months, but from that stint with T-Mobile and what you're doing now at AT&T, was there anything that when you start at AT&T you could see directly kind of correlate, or any remnants given that they're in a similar space, or even the jobs itself or anything like that?
Well, I think both telcos are phenomenal at what they do. The teams that I worked on were strong. I still keep in touch with people from T-Mobile that have moved on to Microsoft, Amazon. And I say that there's going to be the underlying common identifier of wanting to do the best and be the best in their field. It could be the best telco, it could be the best at market. But the idea behind every team I've worked on is they strive for excellence, and they expect excellence from their people, but they also expect you to have a good work-life balance. I think that's one thing I do enjoy with both companies is when I was an intern even, They made me feel right at home at T-Mobile. They were very forthcoming and welcoming. They just took me in day one, and my supervisor was just super friendly. She knew that I was from Arizona. I had not really traveled or knew Seattle. She's like, here's some books. Here's what you could do on the weekends. Come on in and enjoy. And I had a great time while I was there. I did some phenomenal work, and I worked on some amazing projects. And then that kind of springboarded into what AT&T provided, in the sense that it was very driven not only towards excellence, but being the best version of yourself and really diving into the roots of what allows you to be the best version of yourself. And that was a great question that you asked, because it kind of took me a minute to kind of formulate my answer there. But I would say that my time at T-Mobile and AT&T, very different ways they approach it, but at the same time, they're both striving for the same goal at the end of the day.
Yeah, because I was curious, because I had forgotten, because we have, the very first time we even interacted was back in 2018, because I was actually asking you about your experience with your MBA at Arizona, which we'll touch on as well. So when I was refreshing my memory of your background today before we started, I saw T-Mobile on there. I was like, oh, that's right, I forgot about that. So I was like, I wonder what are the similarities and differences. So thank you for sharing that.
I've worked with a lot of companies, great experiences all around. That's why I like calling myself a jack of all trades and a master of one or two things now, or striving master, I should say.
Well, that's good. I mean, in addition to that, like the other big name on that you've been at was also CVS.
Yes, I was at CVS. I was in a dual master's program, so there's this 2.5 years. That means I have 2 internships. My first one was at CVS Health in their marketing and technology division for HR.
All right. Well, I suppose since we're already on the topic, we may as well stick on this here. So I alluded to your MBA and it was MBA and MIS, correct? You said, like I said, dual degree at Arizona.
Yeah, it was a dual degree. Yeah.
Okay. So and your undergrad was at UNC Chapel Hill, University of North Carolina.
Yep, that is true. I'm a Tar Heel.
Yeah. So these are 2 good programs. And I remember when I reached out to you, it was because I was exploring different MBA opportunities. Granted, I had just graduated, but I was still kind of doing my intel, even though, I may not have been starting immediately. And I'd kind of like to, I guess, revisit that and discuss what it was that you enjoyed about your experience there, both on the MBA side, the MIS side, and then if there was anything that you felt maybe was lacking or things could have been better, what you think those things could have been.
Well, I think one of the key concepts there too is, and I get this question a lot too, is why did you go back for 2 master's degrees? Usually people are very motivated to get an MBA, but why 2? Like, do you want to kill yourself in school more often? And I suppose for me, I could have gone back and got my MBA and enjoyed a concentration in business intelligence or a concentration in marketing analytics. There's not saying I couldn't have. But Arizona has a very, Arizona gave me a very compelling reason to go get an MIS degree as well. They're top 3 in the United States for management information systems, right after MIT and Carnegie Mellon. So we're kind of the forerunners at what MIS is. Our program was, their original program in the United States. So a lot of the original people that, dove into the early stages of big data, understanding artificial intelligence, what goes into truly understanding machine learning, they came out of U of A, and they've taught some of the brightest people out there in today's world. I got people from my classes who are some remarkable leaders in training over at Facebook, Google, all the high-tech companies, got people over at Goldman Sachs. I mean, they got some movers and shakers there. So I suppose part of the reason was I had this opportunity to go and get 2 degrees, but why pursue it is, in today's world, I think everyone needs to have an understanding of business. It's almost like a fundamental in order to get by. And I'm sure you know this too. MBA is slowly becoming more and more commoditized. You see executive MBAs, you could do it in 10 months if you want to. They have miniature MBAs out there, but at the end of the day, it's business. So you have to understand what business is. So one, I thoroughly enjoyed my MBA because I came from startup. So the idea that we're saying T-Mobile, AT&T, CVS, all these Fortune 500 companies, that's not how I got my start. I got my start at a small advertising agency based out of Santa Monica, California. Before that, I was in entertainment. So I suppose I learned in the early days as a startup what all of the different piece parts of MBA, the different piece parts of business were, but at least for me, I needed a little bit more of a formal education to see how everything goes together. I learned best, and this is just a personal opinion and personal preference. I learn best to put pieces together if I can get a little bit of formal training.
Yes.
That means, okay, let's go back, get the degree, because I also knew that there was basically a glass ceiling for where I was. And even though there was a great opportunity there, I knew that I could probably expand my different pathways in life if I went back. But I also knew that data, statistics, because of the work I was doing in advertising, this was the early days of Facebook and the wild west of social media, it was going to be a big deal in the future. I just didn't know how and in what form. So that's why MIS kind of came into the picture. Like, all right, you probably need to understand where the data is coming from, how this plays into a company's future. But as much as I wanted to go back and say, hey, let's go learn coding and be this really super awesome computer scientist, that's just not my DNA. I can code, but I'm not very good at it, and I will say that on the record. So if any recruiter wants to come and is like, oh my gosh, what's she saying now? She doesn't know how to do Python anymore. I'm like, if you hit a little gun to my head, I could probably bang out some really good lines, but at the end of the day, there's some very talented people who are far better at than me. However, that being said, I'm not going to stray off topic. MIS joined with an MBA. Let's break that down. MIS is focused, at least my degree, was focused on how you can apply computer science skills in a business environment. Think of MIS in many ways as the business behind computer science. I had people in my classes who are phenomenal computer engineers, phenomenal computer scientists. These are people that are coming in from some of the top schools internationally who have done some phenomenal work in technology consulting, but they don't know how to present that information or those projects they do in a concise manner to non-technical audiences. So you have your technical people and your non-technical people. And when I worked at W4, the advertising company I was at, I learned that there's this kind of gap. So the MBA MIS joint degree allowed me to kind of connect that gap. And I'm using both of those and leveraging both degrees to the maximum ability in my current job. So it's kind of cool that I was able to do that. Sometimes you kind of go into one particular degree and you leverage only like 10% of the skill set.
Right. Me,
I'm leveraging it all I can. So the pros and cons of both of them are MBA taught me the foundations of business 101, if you want to call it. And of course, my concentration, at least at U of A, was in marketing. So I have an understanding of customer segmentation, voice of the customer, all of that. But at the same time, I also understand systems analysis and design. I can go through and understand what are the steps in software development life cycles. Because all of that right now is merging together. So I guess that's the benefits of why I went back to the dual degree. Mm-hmm. And what I liked about it is it balanced each other out. At least what was presented to me at University of Arizona and kind of how I self-engineered the pathway I took. Because you go through and you're like, I want an MBA and I want an MIS. The route I did is going to be different than somebody else. And then it has to do with the classes you take, the teachers you have, the extracurricular activities, the projects you get yourself into. There's a lot into it, but I hope that kind of paints a picture.
Yeah, absolutely.
Context.
Yeah, absolutely. That combination of MBA and MIS, like you said, you found how to leverage them both as best as you can, like maximize it versus just slightly at that 10% clip. Do you think, because as you were describing that, this was kind of coming into my mind, do you think that combination is on the business side of jobs, not like science or something like that, so on the business type of roles, is that the most dynamic combination to possess at this point, given how things are now, having both the technical knowledge on the computer side, but then also the business knowledge on the other side? Off the top of my head, I'm like, I don't know what might make an individual more dangerous and appealing in that kind of setting.
That's a good question, and I'm going to give you a pretty biased answer because I've had people ask me this, and I'm going to also say it depends. I'm going to say it depends on what you want to do. It depends on what your career goals are. Because if you just want to go back and go to MIS, it's not going to be it. I actually saw something really interesting on LinkedIn today. I'm trying to think of it. It's kind of saying, try imagining writing a full book with your non-dominant hand. So that for me is going through and writing a full book, like a full notebook with my left hand.
Mm-hmm.
I'm right-handed. Now, put that into a business context. You're not going to feel natural writing a book with your left hand. So why would you go into a position that even if it's really cool, really amazing, and it's super flashy, you're not going to feel comfortable doing it.
Right.
Like, it's not dominant to you. That you're going to have to balance out your dominant traits and what you're naturally good at with what the market needs. And this is where it gets kind of interesting, because I could have gone straight down the marketing rabbit hole, gotten my master's in marketing. But for me at the time, I didn't think that was going to be the most impactful way that I could drive my career forward, I suppose. So the MIS MBA double masters, at least because University of Arizona, it's a great university. It's top 3 for MIS, but if you look for its MBA rankings, it's not top 25. So the name University of Arizona, people a lot of the time saying, did you really, what's the school? It's a Phoenix, ASU, and I'm like, no,
yeah.
Great program. University of Arizona has a phenomenal program. The rankings, unfortunately, have a lot to dictate what job you get. I mean, for instance, McKinsey and Company is probably not going to recruit from the University of Arizona. And I mean, anyone from Arizona can go through and like throw a grapefruit at their computer screen. And I say that, but it's God's honest truth. So how do you go to a school that's not top 10, not top 25, but still remain competitive? My perception of it was, you're going to have to start doing something to differentiate yourself. A dual master's degree will do that, because I had the ability to do that, take courses and get 2 master's degrees at the same time. That's a pretty damn good differentiator. And you're seeing that more and more in the marketplace today, where yes, you do have an MBA with a focus in business analytics or a focus in machine learning. But I do think coming at it with a STEM degree is going to help you. And mind you, I don't have a STEM background. I'm as artistic of a soul as you can possibly get. I was thinking about being an anthropologist when I was an undergrad, and my mom and dad had a conversation with me, and I changed that up because there's no money. And unfortunately, at least I don't think there is, and maybe someone can couch me on. What my point is, look at what the market is needing. And at the time when I went back to school, it was in desperate need of people who were not only computer scientists, but could, I'm going to call it, translate what the computer scientists, what the engineers, what the developers are working on, and transform that into a business case that can be presented to leadership, and you basically tell a story of why they're doing what they're doing to solve a business need. So I'm that middleman, and that has become an increasingly critical role in business today, or at least in my mind, because you're seeing this gap between technologists, coders, for instance, and people on the front lines. Now, the people on the front lines are getting more and more savvy about what's happening in the back room with all the technologies, but there's still a gap. So I think that the MBA MIS degree is an extremely powerful one if you want to put it directly into a business context. Now, if you want to go through and be a business analyst, that is going to get you probably in a pretty powerful swivel position, because you understand, all right, here are the different data-driven elements that I need to evaluate, but also here are the KPIs and here are the business metrics at the end of the day I need to go run after. And that's honestly the way the ball bounces in business today. If you don't have your data down and you don't understand it, at least at a high level, that means that you're not really, savvy at Excel. I don't know how you're going to translate and navigate business today, because data is kind of like the fuel by which we live. And that doesn't mean data is going to tell you anything, but having a degree in MIS will definitely kind of put you a step ahead of the crowd. And that dual master's degree indicates to businesses that it's not only a concentration. No, you didn't just take 2-3 classes. You took 2 years worth of material, and you did a number of projects that holistically taught you about that subject.
I couldn't agree with you more on that.
It's a good balance point.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with more on that because when you were talking earlier about like how an MBA it's kind of just like a commodity now. I was thinking, yeah, but because it's interesting how now MBAs seem to be a lot more prevalent. So then it kind of loses its luster. But then, like you said, when you not entirely, of course not, it still puts you at an advantage.
It
But
has some power, but I mean, Elon Musk really recently said that there's too many MBAs in the world and they're out of touch with
I
what
saw
really
that.
makes business go boom.
Right.
So, I mean, I could write a really long reason to Elon Musk why I'm very proud of my degree. But maybe he just has the skill sets. And I will say an MBA is not for everyone. That doesn't mean you got to go run after and get it because it's a pretty shiny piece of paper. It's a very expensive piece of paper, by
Very.
the way. But there's multiple different ways. I'm a true believer that it's up to the person and how best they learn. I know some people who never graduated high school and they're making multi-million dollars today, and there's some of the smartest people I know. But yeah, to your point, it depends on the situation.
I would assume I recall that quote you mentioned by Elon Musk. I would assume that was probably said because of what we discussed earlier in terms of that application. Like, they got the MBA, like they're studious, they're good in a classroom setting, and then from there they couldn't parlay that into a job, or they were able to parlay it into a job, but they weren't able to practice what they learned, which isn't always a direct correlation. But then once they were also there, they just couldn't make it work for whatever reason.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point there. And this is where you're getting into, you can kind of jump off a bridge and kind of get into the abyss of academia versus real world and how MBA plays into it. Just because you have a master's of business intelligence does not make you a master. Let's just kind of get that out the door right now.
Definitely.
You are not a master. If anything, you might be a Padawan learner on your way to becoming a Jedi at one point if you're lucky. I do like Star Wars a lot. But the point is, you have the skill sets and you have the knowledge. No, maybe that knowledge is not the right word. You have the skill sets because you learn those skills in school, and you also have a bunch of facts that you know. Now it's time to apply it.
Mm-hmm.
And you've applied that because a lot of times they go through and they're like, okay, how do you apply that in school? Give me an example. Okay, internships and consulting projects. Those are kind of like your two get-goes. But in terms of application in the real world, that's where the divide, and you're seeing this increasingly become a point of conversation. There's a gap in academia to what the real world needs. So that's why you see businesses coming up with their own schools of training and certification courses, because for whatever reason, MBA classes are just not hitting the mark. Now, that doesn't mean that the universities are not teaching worthwhile skills, but how can you pull it back into the real world? And they're trying to reverse engineer that. But again, it's something that I think, particularly with the pandemic now, we're realizing that there's not really just one way to learn these skills. And is an MBA as worthwhile as it was in the past?
Right.
I still think it's an absolutely critical skill set that anybody needs. Now, do you need to have a master's in front of your name? Because I am a master. That makes me feel all sorts of fancy. I wouldn't necessarily agree with that, but it does give you a step up in the Fortune 500 world because you do have that piece of paper. And it is a way to filter through the thousands of applications out there. But at the same time, going back to application itself, does that skill set, do those certifications really mean you know anything? And that's where it becomes a really interesting game where you're going to see the word portfolio more and more often brought up. Resume is not enough anymore. LinkedIn is not enough anymore. You have to have a portfolio that shows your skill set. STEM already has it down pretty good because you can go through and you can show how you went through and created a dashboard for some open source data set out there. That's pretty cool if you can build that from the ground up without using 1,000 libraries.
Sure.
Cool. Soft skills, on the other hand, that's where it gets really interesting because how do you quantify communication, for instance, or how do you quantify customer relationship outcomes? I was on the phone with Bob for 2 hours yesterday and I got his system back up and running. What does that mean? Well, his customer lifetime value with us is going to be extended 5 years, but you can't prove that tomorrow.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
I think what you were saying about like I guess it's again to go back to like the application thing. Something that I've noticed is and I maybe you have too, given the vast amount of companies you've had experience with, is there's a big corporate bloat where you'll see
Big corporate what? Bloat?
bloat, yeah, like this bloatedness where like I'll see like a redundancies, and it seems
Hmm.
like I don't fully understand why things are done a certain way, or why a certain person might be leading something a certain way. Like it seems not always productive the way it's approached. And what I was, as you were kind of talking about, like, you earning your MBA, but then, how does it make you a master? But you also mentioned like some of those big companies like that,
Mhm.
and so it seems to me what's possibly has been a side effect of that is you have people that will get the MBA or whatever it might be, and it might be from a nice shiny school too that's ranked nicely, and that
Mhm.
company has a good relationship recruiting out of that school, and
Mhm.
that person ends up at that company because all the stars kind of aligned right there, and maybe they're a
Yeah.
good interviewing school. But again, to go back to what we were talking about, the actual, like, it might not be like they might not have those soft skills you just were mentioning. Like, how do you quantify that? How do you, like, they might not have that, and then they get into the workplace, they already got there, and then they just kind of make it work somehow. So that's kind of what I meant by that corporate bloat too. Is like there's just sometimes people there that seems like don't necessarily have the aptitude to be doing what they're doing, and I think part of that could be because there's people that I know that went to good schools. I don't know how
Mhm.
they got in, and then they end up at a good company. I don't know how they ended up at a good company, and then they just stay there, and then they work, like they don't lose a job. They're just there, and it's very evident too.
Uh,
I've worked places where I see it. I'm like, this person is struggling, or like they're not like adding value to, and I don't see how they're driving. And again, that's from my vantage point. I might not be missing all of it, but I do feel like I've witnessed some things like that. And I'm like, well, now that we're kind of talking about it, it seems like if a person's just able to secure an MBA and it's shiny enough where a company will bite at it, the company bites, they get in, they're like, ah, this wasn't what we thought it was, but they're here already, whatever.
I mean, that's a pretty jam-packed question there, and I mean, it's all because of the perception.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
mean, I think it depends on the person's ambitions. It depends on your goals because I'm pretty sure there's a job out there for everybody,
Right.
and some people luck into a job, others work their asses off. Excuse my French, and they will never get the job that they want. It's just the way of the world. However, that being said, it's like, why do people get jobs and other people don't? I know people who've had the easiest time going through and just like they pop up their head like a gopher, and then there's 20 job offers thrown at them. A lot of it has to do with today's networking game, and I think that there's going to be a major swing in how people get jobs in the future because digital has really changed a lot. And maybe it's just, I consider my first, I mean, if you look at my LinkedIn, it says I'm a digital first change maker. What that means in my mind is I bring all the resources, the people, the knowledge together to kind of make sure that whatever you want to do in the future is going to be digitally impactful in the first and foremost. What I mean by that, and where that's leading me, is that resume is only a part of
Hmm.
it. And it's recruiting is not a one-way road. So when I went out and I was looking for jobs, I applied on LinkedIn, I applied on companies' websites, I applied through the applicant tracking service, kept a nice little Excel spreadsheet. I know there are colleagues and friends from school that I have worked with who have gone through and they've applied for 1,000 jobs. Literally, they have an Excel spreadsheet that they can give you with 1,000 rows of
Hmm.
applications. They may have gotten 2 or 3 job interviews. There's going to be barriers of entry, but digital is really going to drive the difference. And when you say there's corporate bloat, yes, I think in older companies, you can kind of settle into a position,
Hmm.
and for a long while, you may not be noticed. And that may have kind of gotten you by in the future. Now, granted, there's kind of like two different movers and shakers in the digital world. There's going to be digital first companies like high tech companies, Google, Facebook, Netflix, all of them. They were born in the digital era. They've been there. And people are like, wow, you got a job at high tech. That's amazing. How did you do that? Well, you had to work your keister off to get there. And it's not easy. The barriers of entry are not easy. They only take the biggest and the brightest.
Hmm.
But then those are digital first or digital native, if you want to call them. Corporate bloat, from my perception, has happened more in companies that are they have a longer track record. They've been in play for more than 25 years. I mean, AT&T has seen its share of it, as well as any other Goliath, as I call them.
Yeah, of
These
course.
are the companies that have been around since the 1910s, 1950s.
Certainly.
People kind of settle in, and when you have a company of 25, 50,000 people at corporate, that's a lot of overhead. And then at one point or another, and you saw it with the pandemic more than anything, they had to go back and start kind of looking at their expenditures. And they realized, okay, we have X number of people doing X number of jobs. Can we go through and pivot how we do that? And this is where it gets interesting, because you have a person there that's doing a job day in, day out, to your point, may not provide value in that job. So you're now having this huge shift with older corporate entities with upskilling, with reskilling, where they want their people to work and they want to go through and make sure that they're impacting the business in a positive manner. But maybe their old job has to change. Maybe that old job can be sometimes shifted in terms of part of the job can be automated now. That doesn't mean that the person has to go away per se, but we're going to shift what you do to something a little bit more impactful. Now, how that means is the corporate bloat, the idea that you could just do the same thing day in and day out, I think that's changing just because the technology is influencing how the people in different positions can do their job and what value they're driving. So is it truly the fourth industrial revolution? In my mind, yes, it is. But when people argue, oh my gosh, AI and machines are going to overtake our jobs. True, but jobs always go through and change. You don't see a person pick it, like you can call your long lost friend in France now. You don't need to connect via an operator. The job of the telephone operator is pretty much extinct. That was gone in the 1980s, I want to say. And granted, I should know this because I'm in telco. This is terrible of me. But that job is gone. Now you could say, oh, a computer took my job. That's terrible. Oh my gosh. No, we just pivoted it. But now you're going to see that we have like cellular technicians out there and people that are working on the back end of the circuitry and the engineering systems that basically fuel our entire wireless division. That's a different job that wasn't there about 10, 20 years ago. So when you say corporate bloat, people running through and it's like, oh, they got lucky being a job. True, but again, it depends. It depends on their ambitions. It depends on their circumstances that they're in. It depends on if their job is even going to be there in 5 years. And a lot of times, you know what? It may not. You're seeing this already with analytics where machines are creating other machines to run very, very simple algorithms. So the idea of like an entry-level business analyst who's just pulling reports and putting together nice little descriptive statistics may not even be there in 5 years. So you're going to have to pivot. Now, quality assurance to make sure that those simple machines that are creating machines work and do their job well. That'll be a job. I can almost guarantee you that because humans still kind of run the game, and I don't think we're going into the matrix just yet. It's already there. But the idea with corporate bloat, with people being lucky, I'm just going to keep on saying it depends. And yes, it is all in the eyes of the beholder. Because, yeah, your friend might have gotten that job at that sweet company and somehow fell into a degree and you're like, I honest to God don't know how he did that. He's just not that smart. Like, why are the stars aligning for him? That's your perception. But you don't know what goes on behind the scenes. You don't know if he's sweating bullets and having to study just to keep up with the Joneses. And honestly, do you even want that? I mean, sometimes those awesome jobs are not as awesome as they seem. Yeah, you're getting paid a ton of money, but there's a reason you're getting paid a ton of money. It's not just because you're, they're trying to throw money out the door. If you're getting paid $175,000, $200,000 out of school in New York or in Seattle, cost of living, true, but you got to factor that into how many hours are you really working and is it worth it? And that goes back to the work-life balance. So that's a whole different topic.
Yeah, and then you look at how much are you working, your hours, then you kind of take a look at the salaries like, well, actually I was making more before, not to you would break it down by the hourly. There's something I want to touch on that you also mentioned on the technology piece. You were saying technology could possibly eliminate, or at least you're saying, could possibly reduce that kind of corporate bloat that I was referencing, which I do agree. But I think for certain companies also, and I've witnessed this just through like an interview process, like I've been able to gather, or just in my own experience, that technology piece that you referenced will hinder or eliminate that corporate bloat if that company embraces like technology. Because I've had experience interviewing places where like they're using systems I've never heard of, and I inquire, actually, no, I haven't heard that before. What is it from? And like, oh yeah, it's like really old. I'm like, oh, okay. Now, granted, they're not, at least in my interview processes, those types of programs aren't in the majority. Like typically, like when it comes to like an ERP, it's generally SAP or Oracle, typically, like what I'm hearing. But there's some other stuff that I've heard that I don't even remember the names at this point because I hadn't heard before. I was like, I don't even know what that is. But I'm like, I mean, if I know SAP, I can probably learn that. But that was just kind of the note I wanted to make, because when you said the technology piece, I'm like, that's a good point. But it's like, what if that company is just like a slow technology company too? They're not really upgrading. They have antique laptops, like, which always blows my mind, or whatever. They're everything's only in Excel. They have no ERP. So it's like, well, what happens at that point?
Yeah, it's funny. And I mean, I've worked in a number of companies that are like that, where they have all of their solutions on their cutting edge for their customers. Now, I'm going to go back to a fairy tale. Have you ever heard of the story of the cobbler's children?
No.
No? Well, do you know what a cobbler is?
Yeah, isn't that the shoemaker or something? Or am I off?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
It's the cobbler's children or the shoemaker's children. The idea is the shoemaker, his children never have shoes, but his clients always do.
Right.
The reason is that you are the cobbler and the workers are the children of the cobbler. You go through and your clients are going to always have the best, the shiniest, the most amazing solution that's up to date, but you're going to have an antique laptop from 1986. A lot of that has to do with cost reductions and honestly how long you can get that piece of equipment, that, whatever it is, that ERP system, as you say. I mean, if your system, there's a lot that goes into it, but if your people know how to work it, if you know how to maintain it and it doesn't cost you more money, then why bother? But a lot of it has to do with market changing, competitiveness from your different players in the space, in addition to what are customer expectations, what are your employee expectations, and then what's basically the time and money it takes to invest in that particular piece of equipment or in that technology. And like all of those go into it. And then upskilling and what is the cost? Basically, you have to kind of run a cost benefits analysis on a yearly basis. But mix that in with a nice little story about the cobbler's children, and you got yourself a winning combination for any leadership meeting.
Hopefully. So let's go back to, you kind of talked high level what you're currently doing at AT&T. Something that, and I've seen you post about this, and you referenced it, like you kind of have it mentioned on your LinkedIn profile regarding data and making data-driven decisions, things along those lines. So in your role, how critical is data, and how do you guys leverage it in your decision making in whatever capacity that you can share?
Well, I mean, one of the pillars that AT&T strives to have is we make well-informed data-driven decisions, and we're not using data as the only means to make a decision. That doesn't mean that, but we're using data to objectively inform us of all the options out there. So data is absolutely critical for my job, and it's the way in which not only my leadership, but a lot of leadership teams make their decisions today. Because if data pulled properly, cleaned up properly, and presented in the most effective manner, it can really make or break the difference in a lot of business decisions. And the current project I'm on leveraged data and doing a wide variety of different modeling exercises to come up with the idea that we needed to transform one of the pillars of our entire B2B platform. And that's going to shift how we position ourselves in the marketplace. So when you're trying to get, and here's the fun part of, at least I've learned about corporate, everyone's looking for funding. Because at the end of the day, a corporation is all about, okay, I got $1,000 to spend and I'm making this number up. And I got 25 different projects out there that all want to get funding. So these are all business units who have these cool ideas, want to do these amazing things, but they can't. They need money to go do it. So that means that internally, you have to basically sell your idea. And this is where it kind of gets cool with why the MBA comes into play, because business communications and executive leadership and executive presence is critical for this matter. You got to go run after and get the money. How do you get the money? How do you prove that corporate should give you part of its hard-earned, blood-spent profits to go do a thing, whatever that thing is? It could be upgrading a system. It could be building out a new revenue channel. It could be, I don't know, giving away 20, pairs of Nike shoes. Okay, awesome. Why should I go do that? And they're going to ask you, cool, it's a great idea, but so what? Mm-hmm. The so what is where you need to present the data, saying, this is what I know about the present mode of operation, PMO. Here's what I know about future mode of operation. Here's the difference. And you can lay out different piece parts. And this is where data-driven decisions come into mind. You look at the trends. You look at historical data trends, and you have to identify this, and there's multiple layers to this. I won't bore you with the details. You look at historical data trends. You look at where the current situation is and how it fits into historical data trends. And if you can, you predict out where those trends are going to go in the future.
Yep.
So that's one way of doing it. And then you can also kind of go through and pull in different statistics that leverage competitive analysis. So there's an internal side and an external side. And then you can also look at what are all the different pieces of the pie. And if you can talk in dollars, because it's not only about data. You can come in and say, well, we're 25% in the market, and that's really cool. Talk in dollars. This is where finance, and I am not a finance person, but I've learned to respect it and understand it and leverage it. You need to understand the financials of a situation, and particularly those in marketing, because there's always a saying that marketers and finance are absolute opposites, because marketing is trying to spend the money, finance is trying to go through and save the money.
Right.
So marketers are like, all right, I need to spend money. Finance is like, no, you're not going to spend money. So marketers actually have to come through, know the data, and saying, well, if you give me $1, I can make you $2. And this is how I'm going to go do it, and show them the data. So data is absolutely critical, because if my team did not go through, lay out a business case, which is derived from data, saying here are the different piece parts, and then back it up with a story that fluidly tells how each of the different data pieces fit together, because there's almost two different parts of it. You have to do the dirty, and that means, run the numbers, pull the Excel spreadsheets, cry a little bit when you have to compile all the numbers together. But then you got to extract the highlights, put it into a nice little PowerPoint presentation, make it look pretty. And not even that, it's not even looking pretty, but like synthesizing the data, the key takeaways, because an SVP, a senior vice president, is not going to look at Excel. Just kind of know that right now. But if you don't make the effort to pull the teeth where you need to get that data-driven aspect into play, you're not going to get the decision that works in your favor. So is data-driven decision-making critical? I can't think of a company I haven't worked at yet that has not said, yes, data is not necessary. Keep on and follow your heart. It's all trying to be data-driven. But you can get into a quagmire where you rely too much on data. Certainly. And you don't rely on common sense and a little bit of subjectivity based upon best practices. So it's a balance.
Got it.
That's where you get into a fun area. Still navigating that world.
Certainly. So I want to conclude on one final thing. That entire thing you just described right there, that entire answer you provided. So the synthesizing the data, compiling it,
Mhm.
making it into a presentation, doing business cases, all of that. So you do that now, of course. You've been doing that. At what point in your career did you find yourself finally comfortable doing these things? Because I'm sure in the beginning maybe there's
Mhm.
difficulties, right? A learning curve, to say the least. Is it was you just described? You were able to break it down very nicely that make it seem easy to follow. It's like, okay, sounds like it's something doable, and it is of course doable, but it's by no means easy. I've done a fraction of what you
No,
described,
no.
and it's not a simple process. So my question is, at what point did you feel comfortable doing it, and what would your
Mhm.
advice be on people that are on a similar path, doing a similar thing, to help them be able to do all of that? Because it's not
That's a
easy.
good question. Wow. I always thought I was good at business communications. I always thought that I would go into it naturally, and I, I mean, I honestly entered MBA and I'm like, I rocked this. Turned out I kind of sucked at it. And business communications is very different. And this is what I kind of had to step back and realize. I know how to talk, but that doesn't mean that people comprehend. So there's two different notes there: communication, and then there's comprehension. I knew the first. I knew how to communicate. I knew how to talk. I didn't know how to ensure people understood and were comprehending and synthesizing what I was saying.
Hmm.
Like, were they really retaining what I'm saying? Like, are you going through and retaining and responding to what I'm saying right now? I would say yes, because you are asking me some very great follow-up questions. So when did I become comfortable with that? Probably during my third rotation. I say that because leadership development program at AT&T is very holistic and very thorough with making sure that you really do round out all your skill sets. One of mine was communication. That's kind of surprising since I thought I was great at it in MBA. Turns out with corporate level exposure as I was getting, because I have had exposure all the way up to the C-suite and talked to some of the most influential people at AT&T and presented to them. That can get on one's nerves very quickly. A lot of it is practice. A lot of it is going to be great coaching. And a lot of it is going to be really sitting down, taking a hard look at yourself in the mirror and reflecting. And then using that reflecting to build up your confidence. It's not easy. Why I feel comfortable, and when I say I feel comfortable, that doesn't mean I'm perfect at it. That doesn't mean that I'm still not going back, crossing the T's, dotting the I's. And AT&T is a very collaborative culture. So what I do is not my own. It's the synthesis of a number of people's hard-earned work. Some of the brightest minds I go through, and I essentially build out a robust storyline of connecting technology to business and by leveraging data. So I'm connecting the dots.
Right.
It's all well and good, but I didn't do it myself and I didn't do it alone. I've been doing it a lot because it's a skill set that I can leverage, and it's something that's very unique and one of my competitive differentiators, I would say. When people say, what are you good at? And I'm like, well, I can visually tell a story and break down the piece parts between what the technology team is doing and roll that up not only into an effective communication strategy for leadership, but I also know how to drive that technology to ensure it aligns with business goals. It's a pretty cool thing, I think.
I agree.
But I needed to work on a number of projects. I needed to be involved in not just one consulting project, which is 3 months, but be on something for 6 months, and then on a project for 8 months, and then be pivoted on that same project, but in a completely new manner. And that's where I think I finally started kind of getting an understanding of it for it. It's not as much as you want to say a 2-month project will give you that. It will. And granted, I'm coming at it from an industry standard. I'm sure you may have interviewed a wide variety of consultants on your show, if you've had the ability to. The way consulting works is a little bit different than how I'm going to work. I'm going to be on a project for 12 months. Now, granted, consulting, they can be on a project for 12 months too. But the way that an internal industry focused company works, I think is different. And I can absolutely go through and confidently present. Now, if they were to say, Megan, you need to present to John Stanky tomorrow, who's the CEO of AT&T, I would click in my boots a little bit because that would be pretty darn sweet. But at the same time, I would have the confidence in my ability to tell an effective story. But a lot of it too, honestly, I'm going to take a step back and say a lot of it has to do with learning to ask the right questions. My dad will probably stand up and give me a round of applause for giving that answer. But a lot of what I learned to do during this time where like, yeah, I know how to effectively build up. I know how to do this now. Is because I ask the right questions and understand what to ask up front. And that, I think, goes back to the basics of business. And it's something that some people say, oh, well, that's common sense. You should learn like off the bat. Why don't you just ask, what are they expecting? When's the deadline? Who do I need to talk to? Who do I need to bring in?
That's
true,
not it.
But it doesn't, that's good for some people. And maybe some people have that natural God-given gift to go through and ask those questions. Other people are not. And I was one of those people that had to learn the hard way and trial and error to go through and ask those questions. So I think practice, learning to ask the right questions, and you're going to go through a period of time or multiple periods of time where it's going to be tough. You're going to learn the hard way. And if you don't allow yourself to get into those situations, that means that you're probably in your comfort zone and you're not doing anything to really get to a point where you're going to be confident. Or you're confident in what you're doing, that's great for you. But if you're going to really learn something more, you're going to feel stressed out, kind of panicky, short of breath, maybe a little hysterical. But then you get on the other side and you're like, I can do it. It's going to take some time. But I would say going into MBA, I thought I was super good at something. Kind of came into AT&T thinking I was, going to knock it out of the park. And then I faced challenges and overcame those challenges, had some great mentors and support along the way, learned from it. And on the flip side, I could say now I am super confident in my ability to put together a business case, pull together the data, analyze it, understand the technologies and systems that go into forming that digital solution, and then breaking that down into the different implementation and tactical steps you need to take while aligning all of that to the overlying business objectives and making sure that it helps something, whether it's going to be an internal process that's going to effectively reduce costs for us, or is it going to generate more revenue because we can inspire the customer to do something that they haven't been able to do before. But it takes time and practice.
And asking the right questions, I think, is a really big part of what one of the big parts of what you just said, because in doing that, you open up new paths to where that can go. Because if the onus is on you if you're completing the task, so if you're not directing the ship in one direction or another, the outcome's gonna have a different yield. So if you're asking those right questions, then that project now goes to a different level. It could have still been good without that question, but asking that question or those questions just took it to a whole different place where even the person you're presenting to maybe wasn't even expecting that. They weren't anticipating that kind of response or that kind of recommendation or whatever it was. And they were not even factoring that question because, maybe they would have already addressed it had they been. So it unleashes a completely different world if you know how to approach that and ask those things. And I think that's part of that is that aptitude and the awareness of what you do and being able to understand what the goal is of that case you're completing or whatever the task is.
Yeah, and I think it too is not assuming, and that's why you need to ask the questions.
Right.
Because at first I'm like, oh, I'm just assuming blank, and that wouldn't really help anybody because you're just going to assume something. You get too far down the road and you realize, oh snap, I assumed wrong, and then you got to backpedal. And a lot of being just in today's world is making your boss look good. So I would prefer to ask more questions. And when I say the right questions, you're not going to ask the right questions to begin with. But don't be afraid to ask questions. Like,
Absolutely.
I firmly believe that there is no such thing as a stupid question. You can say, what is my job? And they're going to be like, that's a stupid question. You should know what your job is. I'm like, well, help me understand what my job is. Or even as silly as that. You start somewhere, and bit by bit, you get to the right questions, whatever those questions are. And I have like an arsenal of like, whenever someone asks me to do something, it could be like a request, because I'm an individual contributor right now in my role. That means I lead large scale projects in a cross collaborative way. I go through and I'm like, all right, I got my arsenal of 6 questions, usually setting up, if you want to think of it this way, ask the who, what, when, where, why, and how questions of a deliverable. They're like, hey, I need a deck that talks about flowers next week. Okay, wow. Who's it for? How do you want to present it? When do you want to present it? What's the main message you want to get by? What is it about? Like, what flower? Is it about a lily? Is it about a rose? And just go down the list. That gives you like your kind of your parameters.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, you reverse engineer the process, saying, all right, it's due next Tuesday. Let's get it back to today. And all of that is basically going to be question derived. And again, this goes back to your original question of like, how did you feel confident in doing all this stuff? You learn all the steps, you learn all the milestones. A lot of it is like, some people say that it's like, oh, this is basics, you should know this from the beginning. There's a lot of people out there where they fly by the seat of their pants. They're extroverts who just kind of live in the moment, and planning is not really their strong suit. Productivity is something that they kind of juggle with just like sheer luck. That's something that a lot of people deal with, and it's something that I've had to handle and learn how to perfect. And a lot of why I feel confident in doing all of this stuff is you kind of learn the sequence of events that could be defined as the basics of just surviving as a human, but are really the building blocks of leading a successful career. And one of the key ones is asking the right questions. But start asking questions. Just doesn't matter which one's first. It could be the wrong question. Just
You have to get there somehow.
Mm-hmm.
You have to get there somehow. Yeah, I agree. Well, Megan, thank you very much. I know you were mentioning you got big stuff to do tomorrow, so I'll let you to that. I appreciate you taking the time and sharing all this information. It was good, even for myself, learning more in detail about your background, what you're doing now, because I see the things you posted interest me. So I'm like, I should talk with Megan if she's open to it. I think it'd be interesting, and it was.
Well, I'm glad to be here with you. This was a great time. I really appreciate it. I'm trying to go through and just connect with more people. And honestly, I do believe in kind of, you give what you have been given. So I honestly do want to pass along what I have learned. And I don't consider myself an expert in any sense of the imagination, guru or subject matter expert. I just know what I know, and I want to pass along those nuggets of advice. Or if someone else has a point, they're like, hey, I know how you could do, business cases better. Please tell me. I know how to connect, technology and business in a completely new way. I know a hack for it. I'm over here and I would love to connect. This has been great. Thank you so much. I really appreciated the time.
Of course. Thank you. Have a good night.